everyone. Thank you for being on time and attending today's webinar on architecting API management solutions for the FSI industry. So today's session is actually co-hosted by Tyk Technologies and also Loxley Orbit. So before we start, I'd like to invite Louis to share the results from the poll. I see all of you have been actually participating, and also introduce you to today's presenter. So over to you, Louis.
Thank you, Becky. ก่อนอื่นสวัสดีทุกท่านนะคะสำหรับเว็บบินาร์ในวันนี้นะคะเป็นหัวข้อ Architecting API Management Solutions for FSI นะคะในวันนี้เราได้รับเกียรติจากคุณบุตตาพัทชายาซึ่งเขาเป็น Product Evangelist ของ Tyk คุณบุตตาจะมาแชร์ข้อมูลต่างๆให้เราได้รับฟังกันนะคะด้วยประสบการณ์แล้วก็ความสามารถทั้งทางด้านเทคโนโลยีแล้วก็ธุรกิจของคุณบุตตาเนี่ยทำให้เขาเป็นผู้ที่อยู่เบื้องหลังความสำเร็จในหลายๆองค์กรในการที่นำเทคโนโลยีสมัยใหม่มาผสมผสานกับการดำเนินธุรกิจจนเขาสามารถช่วยให้องค์กรเนี่ยบรรลุเป้าหมายที่วางไว้ได้ค่ะเว็บบินาร์ในวันนี้นะคะจะใช้เวลาประมาณ1ชั่วโมงค่ะแล้วก็ระหว่างฟังนะคะหากท่านใดมีข้อสงสัยอะไรเนี่ยสามารถพิมพ์คำถามมาไว้ใน Q&A ได้เลยนะคะเราจะมีการตอบคำถามในช่วงท้ายรายการนะคะแต่ขออนุญาตรบกวนส่งคำถามเป็นภาษาอังกฤษนะคะและตอนนี้ก็ขออนุญาตได้เวลาอันสมควรแล้วขอส่งต่อหน้าที่ให้คุณบุตตาค่ะ Over to you, Buddha.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much for that introduction and setting the scene for us. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to be talking about architecting API management solutions for the financial services industry. Just before I dive in, I've just looked at the poll results, and it seems really like most of us are pretty much in that early stage of understanding about APIs at the moment, whether you're either new to this, you've heard about it, or you sort of know about what they are. Today, we're going to be taking it a little bit forward. So we're going to be introducing how this works in the financial services industry, how or what it takes to build API first products, and what is the role of an API management platform like Tyk in actually architecting such a solution. So let's get started. I think Yui already mentioned, so if you do have any questions during the session, I won't be able to see those questions, unfortunately, but I will take up those questions right at the end of the session. Feel free to use the chat or the Q&A section. I think there is a specific section to ask your questions, and we will respond to those towards the end of the session. So with that, let me start sharing my screen. All right. So again, hello and welcome. We're going to be talking about architecting API management solutions for the financial services industry. I am Buddha, product evangelist at Tyk, and I'm joining you today from Singapore. And here is our agenda for today. So today we're going to be looking at a little bit about the financial services industry landscape, talk a little bit about the traditional institutions, the new techs and the consumers, sort of how this new digital revolution has come about and what impact that has had in this landscape, followed by what are the key concerns when you're building an API first product, then looking at the role of an API management platform, or what is API management platform, and how a platform like Tyk can help you build those API first products. What would it take to architect a robust solution? What are the different things that you need to consider when you're doing that? And how does an API management platform sort of add to that advantage? And then finally, we'll look at a very, very small use case in the digital insurance space and see how we have helped this particular company in solving some of their key challenges in this area. So with that, let's get started. So just to have a quick look into the financial services landscape. So of course, this landscape, like a lot of the other digital spaces, has evolved. There have been a couple of players in this market for a long time, especially around the traditional system. So when we talk about financial services, we are primarily, today we're going to be looking at the banking sector as well as the insurance sector. So within both of these segments, we have sort of looked at three key stakeholders that we want to talk about. So that would include your traditional institutions. So starting off with the traditional institutions, we talk about your banks and your insurance companies. These are guys who've been around for a while. They have been here for probably almost generations at the moment. Then we are going to be talking about the new techs, or sort of the advent of the digital revolution that has come about in these segments, and that has sort of led to the creation of your fintechs and the insurtechs, or the insurance technology companies. And then finally, at the heart of it all, we have our consumers, whose needs have essentially driven this entire revolution in this landscape. And really the challenges that the traditional institutions have sort of faced have come about from some of these evolving needs that the consumers have had. So just looking a little bit deeper into the traditional institutions. Traditional institutions, again, we're talking about banks and insurance companies. These will be organizations that have been well established and have been reputable. They have their own reputation that has been built over generations in terms of the kind of services that they have provided. They have done so in a reliable manner, and therefore people have been going to these organizations or institutions to gain their services. There are also organizations that have really, really strong infrastructure and operational capabilities that have been built in, once again, over a period of time, trying to fine tune all of those capabilities. And then finally, these are also organizations that have significant financial prowess when it comes to what kind of services you provide from a bank or as an insurance company. And while these have been, obviously, these are the big benefits of these traditional institutions, there are certain challenges that have come about because of digital revolution as well, because with the changing consumer needs, it has been sometimes quite difficult for these traditional institutions to adapt to those changes and to change their technical stack. Because once again, if we think about the timeline of existence for these organizations, they have been around for a long time. And sometimes there is a bit of a drawback when it comes to providing things in a reliable and stable manner, while also trying to look ahead into the future. So this has been somewhat of a challenge when it comes to traditional institutions. So that sort of led to the advent of the next key stakeholder in this area, which are the new techs. And these are primarily the fintechs or the insurtechs, slightly more digital savvy organizations. They are a lot more agile in nature and quicker to adopt to changes and requirements that are coming across from consumers, and are a lot more focused when it comes to meeting specific needs and challenges, or addressing some of those specific challenges in this particular space that the traditional banks have not been able to handle. And really, while again, these are the positives, the negatives or the cons of the new techs are that they are very, very new to the space, and therefore they may not have the reputation that a bank has or an insurance company might have. They may have challenges when it comes to their financial prowess, because they might be dependent on the traditional organization, the incumbents, so to speak, in order to provide the core services that are required in the financial services industry. A lot of times what happens is there is always this notion that the new techs are supposed to take over the banking system or the existing traditional banking systems, that they are essentially the way forward. However, the reality is that in order for the financial services industry to actually thrive, what is needed is a more collaborative approach between the traditional organizations and the new techs. And this collaboration is specifically in the digital space is made possible through APIs. So APIs, for those who do not know, stand for application program interfaces. As much of a mouthful that might be, but APIs, really what they're trying to do is they're trying to make communication possible between different systems. And that is essentially what they're enabling at the moment. So if you look at this particular diagram, it sort of gives you a bit of an idea of how the traditional institutes and new techs are trying to collaborate digitally in this landscape. And this involves the exchange of data, exchange of information across both of these two institutions. But at the heart of it all is the need of the consumer. So for a consumer to be able to access information really quickly, to be able to retrieve their account information, or to make any transactions really, really quickly, make it very, very simple using your mobile devices or even your web applications, make that as simple as possible. The notion that there have to be a lot of different services that might be playing in the back end is something that perhaps consumers don't need to know about, and that can be made possible through this collaboration in this particular space. So this is a little bit of an idea about what the financial landscape, financial services industry landscape looks like at the moment, and what has sort of led to the need for APIs and collaboration through APIs. So of course, with that, there are a couple of challenges that come across as well. And that is something that we're going to be looking at next, where we talk about what are some of the key concerns when we talk about building API first products. So this gives you a bit of an overview in terms of the key concerns for businesses. How do you build a successful solution? You have to think about these 5 key aspects. So right at the top, we talk about standards and compliance requirements. Now, if you consider the financial services industry, this is also considered a highly sort of a regulated industry as well, where there are certain norms that come across when it comes to handling your data, handling how you're looking at personally identifiable information. So these standards and compliance requirements sort of dictate how you would go about architecting your solution. These can vary depending on the region that you might be in. In APAC, I think there are different rules, whereas in EMEA or the European Union, there are a few different rules, and Americas handles it differently as well. So there are various different kinds of rules, but they typically tend to dictate how your overall solution is going to be architected. At the core of all of these would be your security, scalability, and stability of your solution. You need to make sure that your application is secure and the transactions that are happening is happening in a reliable manner. And your system that you're building is stable, so that you do not have denial of service, or you do not have loss of access in any form. And at the same time, you're making sure that when the needs are evolving, or there are more people trying to access your information across different regions, your system is capable of handling such a load on an ongoing basis. And that's where your scalability factor comes in. And underlying all of these different things is a layer of observability and reporting. This again becomes very important, because you need to understand what is going on inside your API first product, inside the collaboration that is happening. How is your API being utilized, and to what end? So we'll go into a little bit of a detail into each one of them. So let's start off with compliance and standards. And really there are 2 aspects to this. I think starting off with is how you're going to be handling data. So data rules around data tend to be categorized under data sovereignty. And this is really the adherence to local regulations for the collection, storage, and processing of data. This is again quite important, because a lot of times when we think about data rules and policies, a lot of times we only think about storage. But when you're considering this as part of your solution, you do have to think about how the data is being collected and how the data is being processed as well. So I think all 3 aspects need to be considered when we think about data sovereignty. Also, we need to think about how the data is being stored. So of course, when we're talking about storage or even on the wire, how can you make sure that someone in the middle is not going to be listening to that information or retrieving that information or gaining access to that information in a way that is going to be harmful or dangerous to your user group. So I think that is the part of data that needs to be taken care of when it comes to data privacy and data security. That is one aspect of your compliance standards that you need to be aware of. Again, these can really vary depending on which region that you are in, but typically in a compliance heavy sort of environment when it comes to the financial services industry, these are things that you need to consider a lot more moving forward. The second aspect of this is also the more specific regulations that come in. And one such specific regulation is around open banking. Now, open banking it's pertained to the banking industry at the moment. However, again, open banking standards can really, really vary at the moment. If you look at the landscape as it stands, the guys who are leading the charge at the moment are really in the EMEA region, the region of Europe, where you have very, very specific rules and regulations when it comes to dealing with data. They've got their PSD2 directive there, and open banking, that's where it all originated. And but different areas like the Americas, for instance, it's a lot more open-ended in that sense, where it is something that is recommended but not enforced. In APAC, we have seen that there are specific governments who have their own regulations. For instance, in Singapore, we have the Monetary Authority of Singapore that dictates some of these requirements in a different way. I don't believe there is anything specific at the moment in Thailand. However, there are potentially PDPA requirements coming up very, very soon for the data sovereignty aspect of things. And so when it comes to open banking, again, it's a very, very collaborative environment where you need to make sure that you have the right rules of engagement and integration happening across all of the different stakeholders that are involved in handling or transacting with data. One example of a very specific requirement that tends to be there is around security and how you're going to be authorizing or authenticating your users and access to your systems. And that's where something like OAuth 2.0 or OIDC would come in. It's a slightly more technical thing, but it is a requirement that you might have to be aware of when you are architecting your solution. So that is a concern that you need to think about. Then we talk about security. And when we talk about security, there are really two aspects to this. There is external security, depending on how you can safely expose the APIs that are that you're creating. So if you're a bank or an insurance organization, insurance institute, then how do you make sure that you're exposing your information or your data reliably so that it can be consumed by the new techs or your fintech or your insurtech, so that they can then add their service layer on top of it and then provide the service required to the consumers. So that is one aspect of it. How do you make sure that your external security has been taken care of when you're exposing APIs? But equally, you're also looking at internal security, where within your organization, who has access to what becomes very, very important. So access control as a mechanism for security is very, very important. Who is authorized to take what steps within your organization, so that no one accidentally ends up making a transaction or deleting things or deploying things that could be dangerous to the product as well as to the users who are consuming that product. So that is your security aspect that you need to think about. Then thinking about scalability. How do you make sure that your product is scaling while keeping latency low? So especially when you're scaling across different regions, you need to make sure that it doesn't involve making a transaction to a person who's probably sitting in America and trying to access a server that is potentially in Singapore. Now, of course, the speeds can still be decent. However, there could be a degree of latency which can potentially put off your users across regions. Then think about your customer experience. How do you provide localized experiences when you're scaling? How do you make sure that when you're entering a new market or a new region, you're trying to adhere to the requirements of that particular region, as well as the needs of the users of that particular region, without really expanding out your stack so much so that it becomes a liability for you to maintain? Because when that happens, then your team might also be growing. You need separate teams to actually handle those issues as well. So then you have to think about how you would go about managing a growing team as well. So I think we spoke about access control. That becomes even more important as your team scales up, because now you need to make sure that with different teams, a lot of different teams trying to access or deploy to the singular system that you might have in place. And I'm talking a singular system overall. I'm not talking architecturally per se, but how do you make sure that you're not creating single points of failure, or making sure that you have policies in place that guard against accidental deployments or errors and issues. Then we have stability. Of course, when we talk about stability, we're talking about API reliability. You once again want to avoid single points of failure so that your system is always available, your service is always available. A single moment of downtime can potentially harm your reputation as well as your customer base. This is something that you wouldn't want. So what kind of business continuity practices can you put in place so that your system is stable across any kind of issues that might arise? So do you have disaster recovery in place? And if there is a situation where things do go wrong, what kind of processes do you have there to handle those situations? So rollback systems or backup systems, and how they would be turned back in. So I think those are things to consider as well. And finally, observability. Understanding what is going on within your technology stack, within your API product. How do you go about monitoring your systems and gaining insights? Understanding who's responsible for what. When there is a transaction happening, sort of understanding the entire journey of that request response cycle gives you a lot better understanding and control in terms of, where things could go wrong, has gone wrong, and how can you improve that system as you move along. Your audit logs, your alerts, your monitoring systems need to be in place so that you understand how your API is being used, who is using it, and then how do you tackle issues reliably when they do turn up. So those would be your 5 key concerns, essentially, when you're building out these API-first products in this particular landscape. So let's introduce then, with all of this collaboration happening, just simply building out APIs would not be enough. You need to have a mechanism that is going to enable you to manage those APIs as well in a reliable manner. So this is what a typical API product stack sort of looks like. You've got your user, you've got your client layers that would be accessing your underlying services. And these services could be, from a technology perspective, these could be microservices, or these could be monolithic applications, whatever your backend might be, which are being exposed through your APIs and consumed at that client layer. Now, the challenge with this typically is that you have to bake in a lot of the administrative aspects of your API product right into the service layer itself. So ideally, what you want at the service layer is that you want something that is focused on the business logic of your application, as opposed to also trying to do double duty, baking in the code for your security, your rate limits, and all of the different administrative aspects, your access control rules and policies, and your backup rules and policies, all of that we spoke about previously. Ideally, in this particular version, you'll have to bake all of that into your services, which once again creates a bit of a dependency and potential room for issues coming across, especially when you're scaling or you're trying to build your API reliability. So let's introduce the topic of what is API management. So an API management platform is simply a system that helps with the building, securing, monitoring, and supporting of your APIs. So this is a platform that is going to enable you to do all of these different things. And just to get a little bit deeper into this, a typical API lifecycle management typically has 2 stakeholders. You've got your API providers and your API consumers. API providers, as the name suggests, are people who are building out your APIs. Typically in that sort of picture, you would have your banks or your insurance agencies providing you these, being the API providers. They have the underlying services and they're exposing their information in that manner. Your API consumers could potentially be the new techs who are actually accessing all of this information and building out products that can then be consumed by the consumers. So this has a few different things. From an API provider perspective, they're going to be the ones who are going to be creating, testing, publishing, securing, and designing these APIs. Whereas from a consumption perspective, they're going to be consuming, of course. They'll also be looking to develop their own products on top of it. They need to have a mechanism to discover these products a little bit more, and then finally monitoring and optimizing those API calls and requests so that they can further optimize and make sure that their product is being consumed appropriately. So this is sort of a bit of an understanding of the API lifecycle management journey, which then leads us into the new stack that we have with the API management platform in place, where we have now an abstracted layer in between, which would put in your an abstracted layer, which would essentially take away some of those administrative needs that we spoke about previously, whether that is having a security layer in there. Instead of baking that right into your services, you can actually have that abstracted at the API management layer. And the benefit of that really would be that with all of these different microservices that you might have that are focusing on different parts of your business logic, if your business logic is going to be growing, then you can very easily just use the security that you have then architected at the API management layer as the umbrella to standardize your security practices across your entire solution, as opposed to having to incorporate all of the new services that you might be building in, and therefore thinking about how your security is going to apply to all of that. Your API management layer sort of abstracts that out. And if you have to make any changes to your security, you just do that at that particular layer, and that by default will apply to everything that comes below it. So I think that is just one of those one of the benefits of having such an abstracted approach to building your API first product. Going a little bit deeper, so Tyk is an API management platform. So Tyk is actually a cloud native API and service management platform with a couple of different components to this. At the heart of it, we have our API gateway. This is an open source gateway which acts as the brain of the operation. This is where your computation happens. This is where all of the requests are being processed, and all of the computation essentially is happening, processing is happening at this layer. This can be accessed through a command line interface. For developers, typically, this is their preferred means, or you could access that using the Tyk dashboard. And the dashboard essentially is a graphic user interface that is going to be, that is essentially enabling you to interact with the different capabilities provided by the API management platform. This could be your user management. This could be your addition of APIs and adding new security policies. Anything that you could think about doing from a capability standpoint at the API gateway level can be done through this graphic user interface. It's intuitively designed to do so. Then finally, we have our developer portal, which essentially is used to publish or expose your APIs for the consumption by external consumers. This could be your third-party developers. These could be your partners. In our example previously, in that landscape picture, the new text potentially will be looking at the developer portal to discover the different services and APIs that are available at the moment, which they can then use to build out their own products. So the developer portal that we have created is a very, very lightweight content management system that enables you to expose your APIs. And then one other component that we have in place is called the Tyk pump. So this provides the observability layer for your application or your API management platform. This essentially enables you to get better insights. It acts as a monitoring system. You can add in events for alert systems that you might want. And moreover, it also has the flexibility so that you can actually plug in this information into your existing organization's monitoring system or analytics system, anything that you might want, or even business intelligence tools that you might have to get better insights to it. So this acts as your observability system. So this, as a bit of a glance at what Tyk has to offer from a API management platform perspective, there are a few different offerings that we have, which I won't go into because we want to stay focused on the capabilities that we're providing. And really moving on, we've got, so for the API providers, we've got all of these different capabilities that we have made available, from access control to quotas, rate limits, your debuggers, the customization through the ability to create middleware, the analytics, your policies, your authorization, authentication. So a whole range of things for the API providers. From a consumer's perspective, through the developer portal, potentially you've got your self-service capabilities, your testing capabilities, your documentation capabilities. All of those abilities are being provided here from our product. Now let's move on to the next segment of it. Now that we know a little bit more about API management platform and we've seen some of the challenges that might come across, how do you go about architecting a solution in this space? So let's look at these 5 sort of things that you need to keep in mind when you're architecting a robust solution for the space. And we're going to be going into each one of them, starting with separation of concerns, then the flexibility of your solution, your API governance, then deploying locally and managing globally and what that means, and then finally your API insights. So moving on to the very first aspect, which is separation of concerns. This actually speaks to a lot of different things that we spoke about previously, starting off with your security, then scalability, as well as the stability of your solution. What you're really trying to avoid here is avoiding single points of failure. And this goes into the aspect of security as well, because ideally, when you have separation of concerns, you're really looking to delegate the responsibility of different capabilities that you want in your solution to specific components. So multiple components handling specific requirements. So to give you an example of this, you can have, for instance, and if within your solution, you want to have user management being taken care of. So you can delegate that to identity providers. So identity providers are specifically built to handle user management and authentication. So within your organization, you can have that. And therefore, you can delegate as part of your solution the need for user management into that specific area. The other example over here would be analytics. You might already have analytics or monitoring tools within your organization that are, again, dedicated to do that one single task. And you can very easily plug in to that particular component to get better insights for your organization or get better monitoring capability for your organization. But at the same time, while we do have these different multiple components, the ideal situation is going to be that while you have this delegated approach, you want your solution to work cohesively, work together, so that you're not ending up managing a whole range of different solutions all together. So if you were to delegate 5 different tasks or 5 different systems, ideally you don't want to get into a situation that you're managing all of those 5 different systems completely differently with different requirements. So delegate to multiple components, but have a mechanism in place so that you can actually work cohesively together, and which is what an API management platform can do, which is what Tyk essentially enables you to do as a mediator in terms of how you would go about doing this particular architecture. So this architecture is what you would call your multi-tiered architecture, and you can have a few different approaches here. So starting off with, if you already have a solution in place and maybe you're starting off very small and you have a monolith in place, breaking out your monolith into microservices in parts could be one of the ways in which you can get started. This is, again, because with monoliths, again, there is no right or wrong here, but with monoliths, the typical issue that you might find in some cases is that it can be a single point of failure because you are essentially deploying to a single code base, which can be a bit of a challenge. So if you can start separating out your business logic into microservices, then those microservices can actually scale independently. And even if there are issues with a particular microservice, then that doesn't automatically take down any of the other microservices at the same time. So your continuity of your system and the availability of your system does not completely get jeopardized in that kind of an architecture. Further to that, you can also look at microservices with an API management platform, which is, I think, the architecture that we showed previously, because you're no longer baking in your security into the microservices code base directly. You're actually abstracting that out into that API management layer. And then you can take it even further, where you have your API management layer, then talking to your identity providers and your monitoring systems, who are, again, independently capable of handling these different requirements. So your separation of concerns, again, is something that you should consider when you're architecting a solution for this particular space. It further takes us into the next step, which is the area of flexibility. I think when we talk about this particular landscape and other digital landscapes as well, because the needs of consumers tend to change over a period of time, the requirements might evolve over a period of time, you need to cater for that in some capacity. Typically, organizations might have legacy systems, but you also need to think about how you can build for the future. So the changing needs can pertain to your security needs that might evolve. There might be new security practices that might come in that you might have to cater to in the future. So you need a solution that can essentially enable you to do that. Your business requirements might change. You might want to explore new architecture styles, explore new API styles. How do you tackle that? You need a solution that can handle that. You might have compliances that might come in. So for instance, once again, I touched upon PDPA requirements that might be coming in next year in Thailand. So if there were changes that need to be made, then ideally you want to avoid a situation where you have to completely migrate out of your existing solution, which would cost you a lot of resources, cost you a lot of money, and cost you a lot of time. So which, again, you ideally want to avoid. So if you're thinking about flexibility, think about, you might have the need for different architectural styles, and think about a solution that can cater for that. When I talk about architectural styles, it could be microservices, it could be your monoliths. When we talk about API styles, you could be working with SOAP or RPCs, or you might be working on REST-based APIs, or maybe in the future, you're considering moving into the GraphQL space as a particular mechanism for exposing information or integrating information as well. So you want a solution or a platform, again, that can cater to those needs. It's flexible enough to meet those needs. Platform agnosticism, again, can be a very, very important aspect there, because ideally, you might end up being in a multi-vendor situation or a multi-cloud provider solution, where you might have specific needs that can be only met by specific vendors in this space. And what you want to avoid, once again, is that being tied into a specific ecosystem, which again takes a whole lot of effort and resources to migrate out of if your needs are no longer met by that particular ecosystem. So platform agnosticism can be very, very important. Integrating with your current stack, having a solution that can actually handle your legacy system as well as your current system, and having a means to think future first as well, I think is going to be very, very important. And that leads to customization. So having a platform that when these new changes are coming, if the platform doesn't provide you the capability out of the box, then you at least have the ability to extend that capability and customize it through middleware or custom plugins and being able to handle that. So I think that's where, again, from Tyk perspective, we have a platform that is actually platform agnostic. We have plugins and extendability capabilities. We already have security practices or security abilities that come out of the box, whether you're using OAuth 2.0, whether you're using authentication token or HMAX, all of those abilities are in there. If you want to integrate with IDPs, we've got a solution to do that. A Tyk pump can easily integrate with your observability layers or your monitoring systems if you want to. We have solutions to handle your REST endpoints. We have our gateway can handle GraphQL endpoints. In fact, if you have existing infrastructure that is built using REST or SOAP, you can actually translate that into GraphQL without actually having to write any code whatsoever. We have a product called the Universal Data Graph that is going to enable you to do all of that without having to write a single line of code. And if you want to learn more about that, there is a separate webinar and a video recording for that as well. Then we move on to governance. So governance is, again, a very important thing, sometimes overlooked because we think about building and developing products, but what about managing and maintaining it on an ongoing basis? So governance is all about putting policies in place such that it is easy for people to do the right things, but hard to do the wrong things. This actually goes into the territory of access controls and having, say, rollback access controls or attribute-based access controls, making sure that certain specific user groups or user types, people within the organization, are only accessing information that they are meant to access or deploying to environments that they are meant to deploy to. What kind of versioning strategy do you have in place? What is your GitOps workflows or your deployment workflows or your continuous integration and continuous development workflows or continuous deployment workflows? And I think these are very important aspects that can be overlooked sometimes. So putting in the right policies, putting in solutions that will cater to some of these needs, I think is very, very important. And without really increasing the amount of work that is needed to maintain yet another solution. So I think these are things to consider, think about when you're picking up solutions. And then we move into deploying locally, managing globally. This actually goes into scalability again and reliability, where again, when you're looking to deal with scaling across data centers and regions, typical challenges come across from latencies or problems around latency and providing localized experiences. So what you want to avoid ideally is that you don't want to end up creating siloed solutions which have to be managed across different regions. In some cases, there might not be a workaround because your compliance requirements might dictate that your data is not going to be leaving your geographical boundaries, in which case you might have to go the siloed solution way. But if that is not the case, then something of this sort could actually work out a lot better, where you have your solution across two different regions, your gateway handling that abstraction layer for administration, but you also have a management layer or a control plane that sort of enables you to manage all of your local gateways through a central control plane, so a centralized access point. So I think this could be what we have is called the MDCB or the multi-data center bridge that enables you to do that, whether you're on-premise or using a hybrid approach or on the cloud. So this would be another thing that you can consider. And then finally, we talk about the API insights. This is again goes into auditing, this goes into reporting and monitoring and understanding how your API is being used so that if there are challenges, you are aware where those challenges are coming from and sort of try to debug those issues. And B, trying to understand how understanding API usage will enable you to make better decisions for your product. And that, again, goes a long way in the growth of your product and, focusing on the places where the users are really wanting or the things that users are actually making use of and enhancing that further. And then finally, this is a bit of a bonus, and this doesn't come as part of your architecture or architecting a solution, but it's equally important, which is your support. I think service level agreements when it comes to picking your solutions or picking your products is very, very important. When things go wrong, who would you call? I think that is a very, very important question that you might have to, you will need to answer, ensuring that your system uptimes are maintained. Your bug fixes and new requests when they come in, that they are listened to, there's a process in place, and that needs to be tackled as well. So I think while support is not part of an architecture of a solution, it is an important aspect to consider when you're picking a solution as well. So I think this is something as a bonus point number 6 to consider when you're architecting a robust solution, that who is going to be handling you, helping you out when system stability is in jeopardy. So with that, I'm going to quickly go into, I'm just making sure that time-wise, we are still, I think we're still just about okay. Just a quick use case, which is really in the digital insurance space. And I'm not going to be taking names here because we have a bit of an NDA in this case, but it was a very interesting case study for us where we had this organization, large-scale organization, coming in to request help in terms of digitizing their approach to insurance. So their need for API management were governed by these things. They had systems which were a mix of new and legacy systems. Then they had to manage almost 240 plus APIs with 60 million API calls being made per month. So these are very, very high volume transactions that we are talking about. And then finally, they had to integrate multiple systems into a single centralized solution. So this is what they were trying to achieve and why they came to Tyk. The reason why they chose Tyk was not the only solution they were considering. They had a few different solutions that they were considering. And they ended up going with Tyk because we are cloud native, which makes it very, very easy to use, easy to deploy, and easy to scale. We had customization options through plugins, which can be written in 4 different languages. So you can pick your solution, pick your language, that is Go, Node.js, or Python. Any of those different solutions you can actually use. Then it is cost effective. Our gateway is open source. So if you just want to use the gateway, you don't actually need to pay for anything whatsoever. You can get started up and running today if you want. But if you want to extend your solution, then you can do that in a cost-effective manner as well. So just to look at the outcomes that we got from working together, they managed to consolidate all the API traffic into a centralized platform, which is what they had set out to do, especially when they were dealing with 240 plus APIs altogether. They had logs and analytics for developer debugging and business reviews. Again, very, very important from an observability perspective and decision-making perspective. Then ability to connect to external systems reliably. That was a big, big thing in this particular space where you might have to consider not just from an insurance perspective, you're looking at payment solutions that you might have to cater to. You might have external user access information that you might have to cater to. It's a whole range of different solutions that might be needed under the hood, but you need to have an ability to integrate with all of those areas and consolidate together. And that further enabled them to roll out newer products in a very, very quick and easy manner, which again was the big outcome that they were after, because they were entering the digital space and they wanted to make sure that the speed of their development was not hindered in any form or fashion. So this is where I think Tyk sort of came in to help out this particular organization. So with that sort of concludes our overall understanding of the space. If I were to sort of summarize what we spoke about through our key takeaways, then we have, if I can go back, there we go, our key takeaways. There are 4 key takeaways that I just want you to be aware of, that in this particular landscape, we are talking about digital data collaboration, and that is made possible through APIs across these different stakeholders. These APIs need to be managed. Managing APIs requires API management platforms, and this entails having your security, scalability, stability, as well as observability taken care of. And it can be done in a very, very easy manner if you're using your API management platforms. Then consider, when you're considering a solution, consider your flexibility and your separation of concerns. Very, very important. Of course, you also need to consider things like support. And one last thing would be to consider awareness. And this is something that we sort of hinted upon throughout this session, But I think awareness is very, very important. Awareness of the kind of standards that is required in your landscape, kind of standards and compliances that are put in place for your region, the awareness of the different tools that are existing, awareness of the different things that could potentially go wrong, awareness of what your customer needs, and that dictating your overall architecture. So this is what you would need to do if you're looking to architect API management solutions in the financial services industry. Hopefully, this gave you a bit of an insight around that. I think we are just about on time at the moment. We've got about 10 more minutes, I think, for Q&A. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to questions and answers. And I'm going to stop sharing for the moment. Maybe I think Tippy or Yui, I think, might be just doing a quick summary of this as well.
Yes, thank you Buddha หลังจากที่ได้รับฟังข้อมูลต่างๆอันเป็นประโยชน์จากคุณบุดด้ามาแล้วนะคะก็ขออนุญาตสรุปประเด็นให้ทุกท่านอีกครั้งนะคะโดยสิ่งที่บุดด้าพูดทั้งหมดเนี่ยเราสามารถแบ่งได้เป็น5ส่วนใหญ่ๆเลยนะคะส่วนแรกก็คือพูดถึงวลีที่ทุกคนคงเคยได้ยินกันมาตลอดอยู่แล้วนะคะที่ว่าภูมิทัศน์ดิจิทัลเนี่ยมีการเปลี่ยนแปลงอย่างต่อเนื่องและเป็นสิ่งที่เกิดขึ้นกับ Financial Service Industry ด้วยโดยที่ Financial Service Industry เนี่ยโดยทั่วไปแล้วประกอบไปด้วย3 Stakeholder หลักๆนะคะกลุ่มแรกก็คือผู้บุกเบิกหรือกลุ่มสถาบันดั้งเดิมเช่นธนาคารบริษัทประกันที่มีอยู่แต่เดิมแล้วก็เป็นที่รู้จักมาเป็นอย่างดีกลุ่มที่2เป็นบริษัทรุ่นใหม่ที่เป็น New Tech นะคะเช่นกลุ่ม FinTech แล้วก็ Insurtechกลุ่มที่3ก็คือกลุ่มผู้บริโภคซึ่งหลายท่านก็อาจจะคิดว่ากลุ่มสถาบันดั้งเดิมแล้วก็บริษัท New Tech เนี่ยเป็นคู่แข่งกันแต่ในความเป็นจริงแล้วเนี่ยทั้งคู่สามารถสนับสนุนเกื้อกูลซึ่งกันและกันได้แล้วก็จากบริบทที่ว่ามานี้นะคะก่อให้เกิดเป็นธุรกิจรูปแบบใหม่ของการทำงานร่วมกันมีการแบ่งปันข้อมูลดิจิทัลซึ่งทำได้ผ่าน APIอย่างไรก็ตามการสร้าง API เนี่ยเพียงอย่างเดียวนี่ก็จะไม่พอนะคะธุรกิจจำเป็นที่จะต้องสามารถบริหารจัดการระบบ API ได้อย่างปลอดภัยมีความเสถียรและสามารถปรับเพิ่มลดขนาดได้อย่างมีประสิทธิภาพและนี่ก็เป็นที่มาของโซลูชันการจัดการ API ค่ะส่วนที่2คุณบุดด้าพูดถึงความท้าทายที่ต้องคำนึงถึงเมื่อต้องออกแบบโซลูชัน API ใน Financial Service Industryความท้าทายอย่างแรกนะคะก็คือเรื่องของข้อกำหนดของมาตรฐานและการปฏิบัติตาม compliance สิ่งนี้เกี่ยวข้องกับการจัดการข้อมูลที่ปลอดภัยและมีประสิทธิภาพตามมาตรฐานทั่วไปที่องค์กรจะต้องปฏิบัติตามข้อ2ก็คือความท้าทายด้านความปลอดภัยทำยังไงที่จะนำข้อมูลไปสู่ภายนอกได้อย่างปลอดภัยตลอดจนมีการกำหนดว่าใครที่จะสามารถเข้าถึงและจัดการข้อมูลภายในองค์กรได้ส่วนที่3ความท้าทายในเรื่องของความเสถียรนะคะ stability เราจะสามารถหลีกเลี่ยง single point of failure ได้ยังไงโดยที่ในขณะเดียวกันก็จะต้องพยายามปิดช่องโหว่จากการถูกโจมตีด้านความปลอดภัยพร้อมๆกับมีแผนความต่อเนื่องทางธุรกิจด้วยนะคะข้อต่อไปเป็นเรื่องของความท้าทายด้าน scalability ที่จะต้องคำนึงถึงวิธีการขยายผลิตภัณฑ์ไปยังตลาดใหม่อย่างมีประสิทธิภาพและด้วยเงินลงทุนที่เหมาะสมและข้อสุดท้ายก็คือความสามารถในการตรวจสอบว่า API ใดที่กำลังถูกใช้งานอยู่บ้างใช้งานอย่างไรและก็ใครเป็นผู้ใช้งานส่วนที่3เป็นแพลตฟอร์มการจัดการ API เป็นโซลูชันที่รวมกลุ่มของฟังก์ชันตั้งแต่การสร้าง API การรักษาความปลอดภัยของ API การมอนิเตอร์ระบบและการสนับสนุนการใช้ API ต่างๆเข้าไว้ภายใต้ระบบเดียวกันซึ่งสิ่งนี้เป็นการช่วยลดภาระของ System Admin ที่ทำให้พวกเขาสามารถนำเวลาและก็ effort ไปใช้กับการปรับปรุงพัฒนา Business Logic ที่สำคัญในเชิงกลยุทธ์ได้มากกว่าส่วนที่4คุณบุดด้าได้เล่าให้ฟังถึง Tyk API Management Solution นะคะ Tyk เป็นแพลตฟอร์มการจัดการ API แบบ Cloud Native ที่ประกอบไปด้วย API Gateway แบบ Open Source Dashboard ที่ง่ายต่อการใช้งานรวมถึงมี Developer Portal ที่เรียบง่ายและก็ทรงพลังซึ่งใน Financial Service Industry เนี่ย Tyk สามารถตอบโจทย์ได้ในหลายประการเลยค่ะอย่างเช่นอันดับแรกเนี่ยในเรื่องของความปลอดภัย Tyk มีตัวเลือก out of the box ที่พร้อมใช้งานอาทิเช่น OAuth 2.0 JWT Auth Token แล้วก็ Dynamic Client Registration นะคะโดยมีผู้ให้บริการข้อมูลประจำตัวเช่น Okta Keycloak แล้วก็ Auth Zeroในเรื่องของความยืดหยุ่น Tyk ก็เป็นแพลตฟอร์ม API Solution ที่ให้เราสามารถควบคุมผู้ให้บริการ Cloud Provider ได้และมีช่องทางในการ Integration ด้วย ต่อไปเป็นเรื่องของการกำกับดูแล API ค่ะที่ทำให้องค์กรสามารถดำเนินการในรูปแบบ Role Based Access Control Versioning แล้วก็ GitOps Workflow ได้ต่อไปเป็นเรื่องของการ deploy ที่สามารถทำได้ในระดับ local แต่ว่าสามารถบริหารจัดการได้ในระดับโลกโดยใช้ multi data center bridge สร้าง local gateway จัดการความต้องการด้าน compliance ด้านข้อมูลและก็ latency และใช้วิธีการควบคุมจากส่วนกลางผ่าน centralized platform ในข้อสุดท้ายนะคะ Tyk นำเสนอรายงานข้อมูลเชิงลึกของ API การวัดการรายงานและการมอนิเตอร์ภายในแพลตฟอร์ม Tyk ตลอดจนสามารถเชื่อมต่อไปยังระบบมอนิเตอร์และก็ระบบวิเคราะห์อื่นได้อย่างง่ายดายด้วยเช่นกันค่ะซึ่งกล่าวโดยสรุปแล้วนะคะ Financial Service Industry ของทั้งผู้บุกเบิกและก็เหล่า New Tech เนี่ยสามารถที่จะทำงานร่วมกันได้อย่างมีประสิทธิภาพผ่าน API เพื่อตอบสนองความต้องการของผู้บริโภคโดยควรที่จะมีแพลตฟอร์มการจัดการ API ที่มีความปลอดภัยเสถียรและก็มีความสามารถในการกำกับดูแลและมีความยืดหยุ่นซึ่งจะช่วยกระตุ้นการเติบโตและก็สร้างนวัตกรรมทางธุรกิจขององค์กรได้อย่างมีประสิทธิผลค่ะก็ขอสรุปสิ่งที่คุณบุญได้นำมาแชร์ให้ฟังไว้ดังนี้ค่ะถ้าเกิดท่านไหนสนใจสอบถามรายละเอียดเพิ่มเติมก็คือสามารถส่งอีเมลมาได้นะคะที่ info@loxleyorbit.com ค่ะขออนุญาตส่งไมค์ต่อให้กับเพ็กกี้ในช่วงของ Q&A ค่ะเพ็กกี้ over to you
Hi, TP. Oh, there is actually a question right now, Buddha. Probably we can actually take that before probably TP actually shares the question that the registrants have actually submitted during registration. So there is a question: when Personal Data Privacy Act comes into force next year in Thailand, what to expect and how can Tyk help?
Right. Okay. Good question. So Personal Data Privacy Act typically is, like the name suggests, it's really around understanding your data rules. So it's around privacy of your data, specifically around the personally identifiable information. I think we touched upon that a little bit earlier on. So you need to consider primarily three things: how your data is being collected, how your data is being processed, and how your data is being stored. So there are going to be regulations around each one of them. Now, if you think about how your data is being collected collected, let's start with collected. I think you need to make sure that it is being done in a secure manner. So you have your correct authentication in place, so that there is no your correct encryptions in place as well. So when you're trying to get that information into your system, then how safe and secure that is going to be. So putting in your secure encryptions in place, your basics of HTTPS, of course, that needs to be there. That goes without saying. Maybe mutual TLS from a technology perspective, I think would be beneficial here. Your OAuth 2.0 requirements could be beneficial here. So then thinking about how you would go about processing that information, when you are processing and before storing that information, making sure that people with the right access you have the right access control policies in place, so that only people with the right access permissions will be able to access that information and see that information. When you are then storing that information, you have the right data masking or obfuscation in place, so that you can make sure that if there are personally identifiable information, then you're not storing that information in plain text, so that if there were breaches, there is still a level of security when it comes to who and how that information is getting accessed as well. And more importantly, I think, while we have all of these tools and techniques in place, I think there was a question around best practices and challenges in API management. I'll get to that as well. But I think as a best practice, when we are dealing with personal data privacy, one of the things is to understand what is the requirement for your solution. Typically, you don't want to get into a situation, and I've seen some of the people trying to do this, is they store everything because they think maybe in the future I'm going to need this, and therefore let me just store it anyway. But that's not the best approach. Typically, you want to be very, very intentional when it comes to storing information. So I think that is going to be a really, really important tip to have, that when you're mapping out the requirements, map out what kind of data is actually needed and only request that specific information for your application from your users. so that, if there are breaches and, you have to justify why this was collected in the first place, you have a line of defense over there. Reduce the overall surface area of attack as much as possible. So that is what I would say is, I think, would be a good way to get started on this. There are some best practices and challenges when setting up API management platforms. I think we went through some of those already. I think definitely think about your separation of concerns. Try to build it in a way where you are making sure that you have different components handling different aspects of your solution, making sure that you have flexibility built into this so that if your needs change at some point of time, you're not having to change your entire stack altogether. Ideally use Tyk if you want. I think I'm not trying to oversell this, but I think Tyk has sort of considered all of these requirements as much as possible to when it comes to building out our own platform. So that if your needs were to change at any point of time, you have support for GraphQL, you have support for REST, you've got support for SOAP, you've got support for plugins for customization, you have support for a lot of different security standards in place as well. So everything that I spoke about that you might need for, say, something like a PDPA, it's already built into the solution, into the platform. So it's just one less thing for you to consider when you're looking at. So I think at the starting point, I would say I think that is going to be a good starting point for you. Of course, you can go even further if you want to, depending on the kind of solution, the kind of range of solution, the extent of your solution. You might have to think of other things as well. For instance, one thing is something called the dynamic client registration, for instance, is a capability that we have, which enables you as an organization to use Tyk as a mediator between your authentication server between your identity providers. So if you already have something like Okta and Keycloak in place in your organization, you can very easily tag onto that using the dynamic client registration. Or you could be using Open Policy Agent, which essentially puts in all of these rules and policies for API governance in terms of, if your team can only deploy to a specific environment, you can have that policy in place. If you want to disallow certain groups of users of your system from deleting APIs or deleting policies or security practices, then you can put those restrictions in place as well through the Open Policy Agent. So there are a lot of these different things that you definitely can consider to address some of these challenges when it comes to architecting a solution. Hopefully that answers those questions. I can go deeper if there are more specific questions, but I'm just being mindful of time at the same time.
Yeah, thank you, Buddha, for that. So just opening up, to the floor to see whether there's actually any more questions, from the audience. You can actually type it in the Q&A. If not, you could always reach out to Buddha or myself. You have our email where all the invitations and reminders have been actually sent. After this session, do expect a follow-up email from us where I will again provide you with the download link to our free white paper, how approaching your API strategy, and also a recording of today's session. So, thank you so much for attending today's webinar. So that's all from us, and thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for attending. Well, have a lovely rest of the day and see you next time.